It was my 75th birthday, but the silence in my kitchen felt louder than any celebration ever could. I sat there at my small table, the one with the faded floral tablecloth that had seen better days, watching the late afternoon light stream through the window above the sink. The cabinets were old, paint chipped at the corners, and the phone on the counter remained perfectly still. No vibration, no ring, nothing. There were no cards propped up on the table, no flowers. No voicemails waiting when I'd checked that morning, and again at noon, and once more just an hour ago. My daughter hadn't called. My son hadn't texted. Even my grandchildren, who used to send me silly videos on their phones, had gone silent. I pressed my palm flat against the table, feeling the worn grain of the wood beneath the cloth. 75 years, 3/4 of a century, and somehow I'd become invisible. The ache in my chest wasn't new. It had been building for years, this feeling of being forgotten, pushed aside, deemed unworthy of the family I'd raised and loved. But on your birthday, when you're alone like this, that ache becomes something sharper, something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about love, about family, about whether God Himself has turned His back on you too. I looked out the window at Mrs. Chen's garden across the street, the roses in full bloom, bright and alive. And I couldn't help but wonder, why has my family turned away from me on a day meant to honor me? What did I do that was so unforgivable? Has God really abandoned me because of my doubts? Because I left the church that hurt me? Because I couldn't pretend anymore? The question sat heavy in my throat, and I had no answers, only silence. A week before that silent birthday afternoon, I sat alone in my kitchen praying through the night. It was early morning, maybe 3 or 4, and I couldn't sleep. The house was dark, except for the dim lamp on the counter, casting long shadows across the walls. I had my Bible open to Psalm 27, the pages soft and worn from years of reading. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm chapter 27, verse 1. The words were meant to comfort me, and they did, in a way, but they also stirred something painful deep inside, something I'd been trying to ignore for decades. I kept reading, my finger tracing the verses. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. Psalm chapter 27, verse 10. My throat tightened. That verse had always cut deep, but tonight it felt like it was written specifically for me. My father had forsaken me with his impossible standards. My mother had stood by silently, never defending me. And now my own daughter was doing the same. But would the Lord receive me after all my doubts, after leaving the church, after all my failures? I wanted to believe it. I wanted to cling to those words like a lifeline. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. Psalm chapter 27, verse 14. Wait. Be strong. Take heart. But I'd been waiting for so long and I was so tired. As I read, memories flickered through my mind like old film reels. I saw myself 30 years earlier, a young woman sitting in my father's living room after church on a Sunday evening. I could still feel the tension in the air, the way his voice would boom when he lectured us on holiness and obedience. My father had been a preacher, stern and uncompromising, and every sermon felt like a judgment. I remembered sitting quietly on the couch, hands folded in my lap, trying so hard to be good enough, trying to measure up. My father paced in front of the fireplace, his Bible in hand, his face set in that expression I knew so well, disappointment mixed with righteousness. "Holiness is not optional, Ruth," he'd say, his voice echoing off the walls. "God demands perfection. Anything less is rebellion." I'd been maybe 45 then, visiting home for the holidays with my own children. But in that moment, I felt like a child again, small and scared, desperate for his approval. I wanted him to see me. to love me without conditions. But his love always came with a price tag. Perform well, follow the rules, never question, never doubt. Even now, sitting in my kitchen decades later, I could feel that old fear rising up. The fear that I would never be enough. That God's love, like my father's, was something I had to earn. And if I failed, I'd be abandoned, cast out, forgotten. Can I forgive the family that never really accepted me? A question whispered through my mind as I stared at the psalm. Am I still worthy of God's love despite leaving the church that wounded me so deeply? I wanted to forgive. I really did. But the bitterness had roots that went down into the deepest parts of my soul, tangled and thick, choking out peace. I prayed quietly, asking God to help me let go, but my heart felt like stone. Just days before my birthday, I found myself at a church gathering, a small fellowship lunch at the local congregation I'd been attending for the past year. It wasn't my father's church, thank God. It was gentler here, less rigid. But family wounds have a way of following you, no matter where you go. I stayed on the sidelines, holding a paper plate with a sandwich. I wasn't eating, watching people laugh and talk in clusters. I'd always been good at blending into the background, at making myself small and unnoticed, old habits from childhood. Then I saw her, my daughter Rebecca, walking toward me across the fellowship hall, her face tight with frustration. My stomach dropped. I knew that look. I'd seen it 1,000 times, the same expression my father used to wear. "Mom," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter around us. A few people glanced over. "We need to talk." I set my plate down on the nearest table, my hands trembling slightly. "Rebecca, not here." "Yes, here." She crossed her arms, standing too close, her eyes hard. "You missed the family dinner again last week. You didn't even call to explain. What's your excuse this time?" I felt heat rising in my face. "I didn't think I'd be welcome." "Of course you're welcome," she snapped, "but you have to actually show up. You have to participate in the family, Mom. You can't just keep running away from everything." "I'm not running away," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I needed some space. Space." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've had space for 30 years. You left Dad's church. You stopped coming to family events. You've rejected everything we believe in, everything that matters. And now you want to complain that we're not calling you enough?" Her words hit like stones, each one landing with precision, meant to wound, and they did. "Rebecca, that's not fair," I whispered. "I didn't reject you. I rejected a system that was crushing me. There's a difference." "No, Mom, there isn't." She stepped back, shaking her head. "You chose rebellion over family. You chose your feelings over faithfulness. And now you're reaping what you sowed." The words echoed in my mind long after she walked away. Rebellion, selfishness, performance. It was the same message I'd heard growing up, packaged in slightly different words. My daughter had become my father, demanding a kind of faith that looked perfect on the outside, but left no room for questions, for doubts, for the messy reality of being human. I left the fellowship hall early, driving home in a fog. Why does my daughter insist on this performance of faith, I wondered. Is there any chance to bridge this gulf between us, or have I lost her forever? That evening, I sat in my kitchen again, the same dim lamp casting the same shadows. I thought about Rebecca's words, about the look in her eyes, and then I thought about my father. I remembered vividly the sermons at our family church growing up, not just the Sunday morning services, but the impromptu lectures at home, the dinner table inquisitions about our spiritual lives, the constant scrutiny. My father believed that love meant discipline, that acceptance came only after obedience. I could see myself as a young girl, maybe 8 or 9, sitting in the pew while my father preached. He'd stand behind the pulpit, his voice booming, quoting scripture with an intensity that felt more like a threat than a promise. "Be holy, for I am holy," he'd shout. And I'd sit there, small and scared, wondering if I could ever be holy enough. At home, it was worse. There was no pulpit to hide behind, no congregation to perform for, just me and my siblings sitting on the couch while he lectured us about sin and judgment and the narrow path to heaven. I'd watch his face, searching for any sign of softness, any hint that he loved me just because I was his daughter. But all I ever saw was disappointment. "Do you understand, Ruth?" he'd ask, his eyes boring into mine. "Do you understand what's at stake?" I'd nod, too afraid to speak. But inside I was screaming, will I ever be enough for my family? Is God's love really conditional like my father's? Those questions haunted me for years. They followed me into adulthood, into my marriage, into my parenting, and now, sitting in my kitchen at 74, I realized they'd never really gone away. They'd just gone underground, festering in the dark places of my heart. The night before my birthday, I sat in that same kitchen, wrestling with my heart in the silence. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I held my Bible in my lap, open to the Gospel of Matthew. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Jesus' words stared up at me from the page, clear and uncompromising. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. It sounded so simple when Jesus said it. So pure. But how do you love people who've hurt you for decades? How do you pray for family members who've made you feel worthless? I closed my eyes, trying to form a prayer, but the words stuck in my throat. My heart felt imprisoned by bitterness, locked behind walls I'd built to protect myself. I wanted peace. God knows I wanted peace. But every time I thought about forgiving my daughter, about forgiving my father, even though he'd been dead for 5 years, I felt something hard and cold rising up inside me. "I can't do this," I whispered into the darkness. "I can't forgive them, not after everything." But even as I said it, I felt a gentle tug in my spirit, a quiet whisper that didn't come from my own thoughts. Can I forgive when my heart is so broken? What does Jesus really mean when he says to love my enemies? I sat there for a long time, tears streaming down my face, wrestling with God and with myself. Part of me wanted to cut my family off completely, to protect myself from any more pain. But another part, a deeper part, sensed that cutting them off would only deepen the wound. That forgiveness, impossible as it seemed, was the only path to freedom. I didn't have answers that night, just questions and tears and a faint, fragile hope that maybe, somehow, God could soften my heart. That maybe his love wasn't conditional like my father's. That maybe I was enough, even if my family couldn't see it. That morning, before I found myself sitting at that kitchen table in the late afternoon silence, I had tried one more time. I woke up early, my birthday, and for just a moment, I let myself hope. Maybe today would be different. Maybe Rebecca would remember without me having to remind her. Maybe she'd call first thing, her voice warm, saying she wanted to take me to lunch or just talk. I made coffee, moving slowly, checking my phone every few minutes. Nothing. By 9 o'clock, I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. I sat down at the table with my phone in my hand, staring at Rebecca's name in my contacts. My heart was pounding. I rehearsed what I'd say. Keep it light. Don't sound needy. Just let her know you're thinking of her, that you'd love to hear her voice. I thought about the photo on my refrigerator, the one from 10 years ago when Rebecca and I had gone to the beach together. We'd been laughing in that picture, arms around each other, genuinely happy. When had we lost that? When had the distance grown so wide that I was afraid to call my own daughter on my birthday? I pressed her name before I could talk myself out of it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. I held my breath, my free hand gripping the edge of the table. "Hello?" Her voice was clipped, distant. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, trying to sound normal, trying to sound like everything was fine. I just wanted to hear your voice. There was a pause. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of her moving around. Mom, I'm really busy right now. Can this wait? My throat tightened. It's my birthday. Another pause, longer this time. I heard her exhale, a sound somewhere between a sigh and annoyance. Oh, right. Happy birthday, Mom. The words were flat, obligatory. No warmth, no joy, just duty, barely performed. I felt something crumble inside me, but I pressed on. Thank you, I whispered. I was hoping maybe we could talk for a minute. I've been thinking about that summer we went to. I really can't, she cut me off, her voice sharp. I have a meeting in 5 minutes, and I need to prep. I'll call you later, okay? Rebecca, please, Mom! There was an edge to her voice now, frustration barely contained. I said I can't. I have to go. I know you're busy, I said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could hang up. I just wanted you to know that I love you, that I'm proud of you, that even though things are hard between us, you're still my daughter and I. I know, Mom. I love you too. But I really have to go now. Bye. The line went dead. I sat there frozen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence on the other end. Slowly, I pulled it away and stared at the screen. Call ended. 2 minutes, 17 seconds. That's all I'd gotten. 2 minutes and 17 seconds on my 75th birthday. My hands started shaking. I set the phone down on the table, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Part of me kept waiting for it to ring again, for Rebecca to call back and say she was sorry, that she didn't mean to be so cold, that she'd make time for me after her meeting. But the phone stayed silent. I pressed my hands flat on the table, trying to steady myself, trying to breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my ribs. She'd said she'd call later, but I knew she wouldn't. I'd heard the dismissal in her voice, the way she'd rushed me off the phone like I was just another item on her to-do list that she could check off and forget about. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not the gentle tears of sadness, but the kind that wreck your whole body, that come from somewhere deep and primal. I put my head in my hands and let them fall. She'd forgotten. Or maybe she hadn't forgotten exactly. Maybe she'd remembered somewhere in the back of her mind but decided it wasn't important enough to mark on her calendar, to set aside time for. Either way, the message was clear. I wasn't a priority. I wasn't worth celebrating. I was just an obligation she could push aside for more important things. I sat there crying for what felt like hours. The morning sun moved across the kitchen floor, painting new shadows, and I didn't move. I just sat with the weight of it, the full crushing weight of knowing that my family had truly turned away. That after everything I'd tried, after all the years of reaching out and holding on and hoping things would get better, I was still alone. This wasn't just disappointment. This was abandonment. This was the final confirmation of what I'd been afraid to admit to myself. My daughter didn't want me in her life. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. By the time the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, emptied out. I looked at my phone one more time, checking for messages I knew wouldn't be there. Nothing. I pulled up my text thread with Rebecca, scrolling back through months of one-sided conversations. Me checking in. Me asking about her week. Me sending articles I thought she'd find interesting. And her responses, when she bothered to respond at all, were brief. 1 or 2 words. Busy. Thanks. Talk later. How had I not seen it before? How had I kept deluding myself that we had a relationship, when what we really had was me desperately trying to hold on to someone who'd already let go? I stood up slowly, my joints stiff from sitting so long. The late afternoon light was streaming through the window now, the same light I'd be sitting in hours later when I finally let myself fully acknowledge the silence. I walked to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. Looking at myself in the small mirror hanging on the wall, the woman staring back at me looked old, tired, broken. This was what 75 looked like when you were alone, when your family had decided you weren't worth their time. I didn't know it then, but I was standing at the edge of something, a breaking point. A moment when everything would have to change because I simply couldn't keep living like this. The bitterness was eating me alive and the loneliness was unbearable. But change doesn't come easy, and the path to healing would prove far more difficult than I ever imagined. As the day slipped away, no one mentioned my birthday, no one came. I stayed at that kitchen table as the afternoon light faded into evening, watching the shadows lengthen across the worn linoleum floor. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking each passing minute with indifferent precision. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound a reminder that time was moving forward while I sat frozen in place. I'd gotten up at some point to pull out the old photo albums from the hall closet. I'm not sure why. Maybe I thought looking at happier times would help, would remind me that there had been love once, that I hadn't imagined it all. But as I flipped through the pages, the smiling faces only made the silence feel heavier. There was Rebecca at 5, missing her front teeth, grinning at the camera in her Sunday dress. There was the whole family at the beach when she was 12, all of us tan and happy, building sandcastles. There was her high school graduation, me standing next to her with my arm around her shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. When had it all gone wrong? When had my daughter stopped looking at me like I was someone worth loving? I closed the album and pushed it away, my hands trembling. The bitterness that had been simmering all day began to harden in my chest, crystallizing into something cold and sharp. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the final proof that I needed to accept the truth. My family didn't want me. And if they didn't want me, maybe I should stop wanting them. Maybe isolation wasn't just something that happened to me. Maybe it was something I should choose. A wall I should build deliberately to protect what was left of my heart. Why do they reject me so completely? The question echoed in my mind, but I had no answer. Only the growing realization, is this what it means to be truly alone? The house felt emptier than it ever had before. Even the ticking clock seemed to mock me. A few days later, I met with Mrs. Green, one of the church elders. Her office was small and cluttered with books, a worn couch against one wall, and a small desk piled with papers. She'd called me after the Sunday service, said she'd noticed I seemed troubled, asked if I wanted to talk. I'd hesitated, but something in her voice, the genuine warmth, made me say yes. I sat on the couch, hands folded in my lap, trying to find the words. Mrs. Green sat in the chair across from me, her kind eyes patient, waiting. I don't know where to start, I finally said. Start wherever feels right, she said gently. So I told her about my father's harsh sermons, about leaving the church that wounded me, about Rebecca's confrontation at the fellowship hall, the birthday that passed in silence, the phone call that ended with such coldness. The words tumbled out, and with them came the tears I'd been holding back. I'm so angry, I whispered. I know I shouldn't be. I know the Bible says to forgive, to love your enemies, but I just feel so bitter, and I hate myself for it. Mrs. Green leaned forward, her expression soft with compassion. Ruth, your pain is real. Your anger makes sense. But you're right that holding on to it will only hurt you more in the long run. She reached for her Bible on the desk and opened it, flipping through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Listen to this. Romans 12, starting at verse 17. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with goods. Romans chapter 12, verses 17 through 21. She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. This passage doesn't say you have to let people hurt you over and over. It says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace. You can't control how your daughter treats you. But you can choose not to let bitterness consume you. You can choose to leave justice in God's hands. I nodded slowly, wiping my eyes. But how? How do I do that when it hurts so much? One day at a time, she said. One prayer at a time. You ask God to help you forgive, even when you don't feel like it. You release the desire for revenge, for them to suffer the way you've suffered. You trust that God sees what you've been through, and He will make things right in His time. Hope flickered in my chest, faint but real, but almost immediately, doubt crept in. Is peace really possible with so much hurt? Can I really leave vengeance to God like Romans commands, when every part of me wants them to understand how much they've wounded me? I don't know if I can, I admitted. You can't, Mrs. Green said simply. Not on your own. But God can work in you what you can't work in yourself. That's what grace is. I left her office with a photocopy of Romans 12 folded in my pocket and a prayer in my heart that I only half believed. But it was something. A tiny seed of hope planted in hard ground. At church the following Sunday, the pastor preached from Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5. I sat in my usual spot near the back, Bible open in my lap, trying to focus even though my mind kept wandering to Rebecca, to the silence, to the weight of everything. The pastor was a young man, probably in his early 40s. With an earnest way of speaking that reminded me of teachers I'd had in school, good teachers, the kind who actually cared whether you understood. Look at what Paul says here, he said, his voice carrying across the small sanctuary. He destined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with His pleasure and will. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5. He paused, letting the words sink in. Adoption, not obligation. Not performance-based acceptance. Adoption. I felt something shift in my chest. In the ancient world, he continued, when someone was adopted, they became a full heir. They received a new identity, a new family, all the rights and privileges of a biological child. And Paul is saying, that's what God has done for us. He chose us. He wanted us. Not because we earned it, not because we were good enough, but simply because it pleased Him to call us His children. My throat tightened. I stared down at the verse in my Bible, reading it over and over. He destined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ, in accordance with His pleasure and will. In accordance with His pleasure. God wanted me. Not because I performed well, not because I followed all the rules, but because it pleased Him, because He loved me. But could I really believe that? Could I really be God's beloved child despite my family's rejection? What would it mean to live in that identity, to stop trying to earn love and just receive it? The pastor kept talking, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, wrestling with the truth he'd just spoken. All my life, I believed love was conditional. My father's sermons had taught me that. My family's rejection had confirmed it. But here was Scripture saying the opposite. Here was God's own word declaring that His love, His acceptance, wasn't based on my performance at all. You are chosen, the pastor said, his voice gentle but firm. You are wanted, you are beloved, not because of anything you've done, but because that's who God has decided you are. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I wanted to believe Him. I wanted it so badly it hurt. But the old lies whispered loudly in my mind. If you were really lovable, your family wouldn't have left you. If you were really worthy, they would have called on your birthday. If you were really enough, none of this would have happened. I left the service with my heart pulled in two directions. One part reaching toward the truth the pastor had spoken. the other part clinging to the familiar pain, afraid to let go, afraid to hope. That night, I prayed again, wrestling with unforgiveness. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd sat so many times before, with my Bible open to Matthew chapter 5. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. I read the words aloud, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet house. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. I don't know how, Jesus, I said out loud. I don't know how to love her when she hurts me like this. I don't know how to pray for her when I'm so angry. I closed my eyes, hands folded on the table, trying to form a prayer. God, help me. I want to forgive. I want to love. But I can't do it on my own. I need your grace. I need. A knock at the door interrupted my prayer. I froze, startled. It was past 8 o'clock. Who would be visiting this late? I stood up slowly, moving to the door and peering through the peephole. It was Sarah, one of the women from church. We'd talked a few times after services, nothing deep, just friendly conversation. But I wouldn't have called us close friends. What was she doing here? I opened the door. Sarah? She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. Hi, Ruth. I hope I'm not bothering you. I was driving by and felt like I should stop and check on you. Is that weird? No, I said quickly. No, come in, please. She stepped inside and I led her to the kitchen. The Bible was still open on the table, my half-finished prayer hanging in the air. Sarah glanced at it but didn't comment. Can I make you some tea? I asked. That would be lovely. We sat together at the table, 2 cups of chamomile steaming between us, and I found myself telling her everything. Again, about the birthday, about Rebecca, about the bitterness eating me alive. She listened without interrupting, just nodding, her presence somehow making the burden feel lighter. You know what I think? She said finally. I think God sent me here tonight because you need to know you're not alone. You're not walking through this by yourself. I felt tears prickling my eyes again. Thank you, I whispered. Can I pray with you? She asked. I nodded, and we bowed our heads together. Sarah's prayer was simple, unpolished, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in weeks. She asked God to heal my heart, to give me strength to forgive, to help me see myself the way He sees me. She thanked God for loving me when others had failed to. She asked for peace. When she left an hour later, I felt different. Not healed, not fixed, but less alone. The stirrings of grace, Mrs. Green had called it. Maybe that's what this was. God's tender compassion, breaking through the walls I'd built. Though still fragile, I sensed I wasn't alone in this journey. Can I love those who have hurt me? The question remained. Will God's grace be enough to heal my heart? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it might be. Days later, exhaustion and pain overwhelmed me. I don't know what triggered it exactly. Maybe it was the accumulation of everything, all the hurt and anger and loneliness finally reaching a breaking point. Or maybe it was just my body's way of saying enough. You can't keep going like this. I was in the kitchen again, washing dishes, when the first wave of panic hit. My chest tightened. My breathing became shallow and rapid. My hands started shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the sink to steady myself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling pressing down, the room spinning. I stumbled to the table and clutched the edge, trying to ground myself, trying to find air. My phone was right there. I could call someone, Sarah, Mrs. Green, anyone, but I couldn't make my hands work. Couldn't make the panic stop long enough to think straight. Scenes flashed through my mind in rapid succession. Rebecca's face when she confronted me at church, my father's stern lectures, the phone hanging up, the birthday that passed in silence, all of it crashing over me like waves, drowning me. I paced the small kitchen, back and forth, hands clenched, tears streaming. This is it, I thought. This is what it feels like to completely fall apart. I grabbed my phone, pulled up Rebecca's contact, and started typing a message. My fingers flew across the screen, pouring out all the hurt and rage I'd been holding back. You have no idea what you've done to me. No idea how much you've hurt me. I raised you, I loved you, I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By treating me like I'm nothing? By abandoning me on my birthday? You're just like your grandfather, just like— I stopped, stared at the words on the screen, read them again, and slowly, with shaking hands, I deleted every single one. Sending that message wouldn't help. It would only make things worse. It would confirm everything Rebecca already believed about me, that I was bitter and angry and impossible to please, and it would burn whatever small bridge might still remain between us. I set the phone down and pressed my hands to my face, trying to slow my breathing. In, out, in, out, out. Focus on something, anything. The clock ticking, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat gradually slowing. The phone rang. I jumped, startled, and looked at the screen. Unknown number. My finger hovered over the answer button, but something stopped me. I couldn't talk to anyone right now. I couldn't even form words. I let it ring through to voicemail. Silence again. I sat down at the table, utterly spent. My whole body ached. My head throbbed. The panic had passed, but it left me feeling hollow, scraped raw, like I had nothing left to give. Will bitterness consume me completely? The question haunted me. Is there a way out of this pain besides cutting off everyone and retreating into isolation? I thought about what Mrs. Green had said, what the pastor had preached, what Sarah had prayed. All those words about grace and forgiveness and being God's beloved child. They were beautiful words. True words, probably. But in that moment, sitting alone in my kitchen in the aftermath of a panic attack, they felt impossibly far away. I needed something to change. I needed a way forward. But I had no idea what that looked like, or if I even had the strength to take a single step toward it. The exhaustion was total. Emotional, physical, spiritual. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, and I could either step back toward safety or let myself fall into the darkness below. I didn't know which I would choose, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to break. Something had to give. Because if it didn't, I would. One evening, I shared my story with Mary, a trusted friend from church. It was 2 weeks after the panic attack. 2 weeks of barely functioning, going through the motions, feeling like I was held together by the thinnest thread. Mary had texted me, asking if I wanted to meet at the church, said she had something she needed to talk to me about. I almost said no, but something in her message made me think, maybe I should go. We sat in one of the small group rooms, just the two of us, in worn armchairs that had seen countless conversations over the years. The evening light filtered through the windows, casting soft shadows on the walls. Mary held a cup of coffee in her hands, looking at me with those kind, perceptive eyes. "Ruth," she said gently, "I need to tell you something about Rebecca." My stomach tightened. "What about her?" Mary set her cup down and leaned forward. "I've known Rebecca for a while. We've talked a few times at church events, and I think there's something you should understand about why she's been so hard on you." I felt my defenses rising, that familiar wall going up. She's hard on me because she thinks I'm a failure, because I left the church, because I'm not good enough. "No," Mary said softly. "She's hard on you because she's terrified." I blinked. Terrified? Of what? Of becoming like you. Mary's voice was tender but honest. "Rebecca watched you leave your father's church. She saw the family fracture. And she's built her entire identity on being the opposite of what she thinks you chose. She's convinced herself that if she just follows the rules perfectly, performs her faith flawlessly, she'll never have to face the pain and rejection you experienced." The words hit me like a wave. What? She's afraid, Ruth. Afraid that if she shows any weakness, any doubt, any failure to measure up, she'll end up isolated and judged just like you were. So she judges first. She demands perfection from herself and everyone around her, including you, because she's desperately trying to prove she's worthy of love. Tears filled my eyes. I'd never thought about it that way, never considered that Rebecca's harshness might come from fear instead of hatred, that her rigid demands might be a shield, not a sword. "She's just as trapped as I was," I whispered. "Yes," Mary said, "she is, and she doesn't know how to get out." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling over me. All this time, I'd thought Rebecca hated me. But what if she was just scared? What if her rejection was really a desperate attempt to protect herself from the same wounds I'd carried? What if my daughter's harshness comes from fear, not hatred? I said aloud, testing the words, "Could compassion replace bitterness?" Mary reached over and took my hand. "I think it already has, Ruth. I can see it in your eyes. You're beginning to understand." She was right. Something was cracking open in my chest, a hardness that had been there for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. For the first time in years, I felt my heart softening toward Rebecca. Not excusing what she'd done, but understanding it. Seeing her as broken and afraid, not just cruel and judgmental. "Can we pray together?" I asked. Mary nodded, and we bowed our heads. She prayed first, asking God to heal both Rebecca and me, to break the cycle of fear and performance that had plagued our family for generations. Then I prayed, my voice shaking, asking God for the grace to see my daughter with compassion, to love her even when she couldn't love me back. When I opened my eyes, I felt different. Not healed completely, not fixed, but changed. Like God's grace was moving through this understanding, through this connection with Mary, opening a door I'd thought was permanently sealed. In fact, that Sunday, the pastor preached again, this time circling back to Ephesians chapter 1. I sat in my usual spot, but this time I wasn't wrestling. I was listening, really listening. He destined us for adoption to sonship through Jesus Christ in accordance with his pleasure and will. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 5, the pastor read, his voice steady and warm. You are not defined by your family's acceptance or rejection. You are defined by God's choice to call you his own. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. During the worship songs that followed, I repeated them quietly to myself. I am God's beloved daughter. I am God's beloved daughter. The truth of it began to shine through all my doubts, cutting through the lies I believed for so long. I didn't need my father's approval. I didn't need Rebecca's acceptance. I didn't need to perform or measure up or prove my worth. God had already chosen me. He'd already declared me his beloved child, not because of anything I'd done, but simply because it pleased him. The chains of needing human approval started to break. I felt them loosening, link by link, as I sat there in that small church sanctuary. My identity wasn't found in being Ruth, the daughter who disappointed her father, or Ruth, the mother whose daughter rejected her. It was found in being Ruth, God's beloved child, adopted and chosen and loved unconditionally. Can I live as a beloved daughter beyond my family's rejection? I whispered to myself, what does it mean to belong fully to God? And in that moment, I knew. It meant freedom. It meant peace. It meant I could love my family without needing them to love me back the way I wanted. Because I was already loved completely by the one who mattered most. Back in my kitchen that night, I made a choice. The house was quiet, just me and the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing on the street. I sat at my table with a blank piece of paper in front of me and a pen in my hand. For a long time, I just stared at the empty page. Then I started to write. "Dear Rebecca," I began, "I want you to know that I forgive you. Not because you've asked for it, and not because I think what happened between us is okay, but because I need to let go of the bitterness that's been poisoning my heart. I forgive you for the harsh words, for the judgment, for the birthday calls that never came. I release you from the debt I've been holding against you." My hand shook as I wrote, but I kept going. "I also want you to know that I love you. I always have, even when it didn't feel like it. You're my daughter and nothing will ever change that. But I also need to be honest with you about something. I can't keep trying to earn your approval or acceptance. I can't keep putting myself in situations where I'm constantly judged and found wanting. So I'm setting some boundaries, not to punish you, but to protect my heart while I heal." I paused, tears dropping onto the paper, smudging the ink slightly. "I'll always be here if you want to talk, if you want to rebuild our relationship on healthier ground, but I won't chase after your love anymore. I've spent too many years trying to be good enough for people who will never think I measure up. And I've finally realized that God already thinks I'm enough. His opinion is the one that matters." I signed it simply, "Mom," and folded the paper. Then I opened my Bible to Psalm 27 and began to pray aloud. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Psalm chapter 27, verse 1. I prayed through the entire psalm, my voice growing stronger with each verse. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Psalm chapter 27, verse 10. Yes, that was true. My earthly father had forsaken me with his impossible standards. My daughter had turned away, but God had received me. God had welcomed me as his beloved child. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord. Psalm chapter 27, verse 14. The peace that washed over me as I prayed was unlike anything I'd felt before. It wasn't the absence of pain. It wasn't the promise that everything would work out the way I hoped. It was something deeper. A settledness in my soul. A quiet confidence that no matter what happened with Rebecca, no matter how my family responded, I would be okay because God was with me, because I belonged to Him. Can I release my anger and trust God with the outcome? The question hung in the air, and I knew the answer. Yes, I could. I would. I would. Am I willing to walk in peace even if my family remains distant? Yes, even that. Because my worth wasn't dependent on their acceptance anymore. I folded the letter, addressed an envelope, and placed it on the counter where I'd mail it in the morning. It was done. Not perfect, not easy, but done. I'd chosen grace. I'd chosen forgiveness. I'd chosen to let go. And in letting go, I found a freedom I hadn't known existed. Months later, my kitchen looked different. It was the same room, same faded cabinets, same worn table, but it felt transformed because tonight it was filled with people. Sarah was there, and Mrs. Green, and Mary, and a few others from church. We'd gathered for a simple dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad and bread and laughter that filled the corners of the room. "Ruth, this is delicious," Sarah said, helping herself to seconds. "It's nothing special," I said, smiling. "Just something simple." "Simple is perfect," Mary said warmly. I looked around the table at these faces, these people who'd become family to me in ways my blood relatives never had. They'd walked with me through the darkest season of my life. They'd prayed with me, cried with me, sat with me in silence when words weren't enough. They'd shown me what real love looked like. Love that didn't demand perfection. Love that didn't keep score. Love that just showed up again and again with gentle presence and grace. This was family. Not the family I'd been born into, but the family God had given me. The body of Christ, broken and beautiful, loving each other the way Jesus loved us. I'd heard from Rebecca once since I sent the letter, a brief email, 3 sentences long, acknowledging that she'd received it, but not really engaging with anything I'd said. It hurt, but it didn't destroy me. I'd made peace with the possibility that our relationship might never be what I hoped. I still prayed for her every day, still loved her, still kept the door open, but I wasn't waiting by that door anymore, desperately hoping she'd walk through it. Each morning I prayed with a new peace. The routine had become sacred to me. I'd wake up early, make my tea, and sit at the kitchen table with my Bible open to Psalm 27. I'd pray the words slowly, letting them sink deep into my spirit. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Psalm chapter 27, verse 1. There was a gentleness in my heart now that hadn't been there before. A trust in God's faithful presence that steadied me through whatever the day might bring. The bitterness had lifted, replaced by something softer. Hope. Peace. A quiet joy that didn't depend on my circumstances. I still had hard days. Days when I missed my daughter so much it hurt. Days when I wondered if I'd done the right thing by setting boundaries. But even on those days, I could come back to this truth. I was God's beloved child. He had not forsaken me. He would never forsake me. The tea steamed in my cup, and I took a sip, looking out the window at the morning light. Mrs. Chin was in her garden again, tending her roses. I waved, and she waved back, a simple connection that made me smile. Life was different now. Quieter in some ways, richer in others. I'd lost the family I'd hoped for, but I'd gained a peace I never knew was possible. At church, I shared my story quietly with a small group. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we'd gathered in the fellowship hall for our weekly meeting. There were maybe 10 of us, sitting in a circle, coffee cups in hand, sharing our lives with each other. Someone had asked if anyone had a testimony to share, and before I could think too hard about it, I found myself speaking. I want to tell you all something, I said, my voice a little shaky at first, about how God taught me what it means to be His beloved child. I told them about my father's harsh sermons, about the years of trying to measure up, about Rebecca's rejection, and my 75th birthday spent in silence. I told them about the panic attack, about the bitterness that nearly consumed me, about the moment I realized I had to choose between holding on to anger or stepping into grace. And God met me, I said, my voice growing stronger. Right there in the middle of my mess, He met me. He showed me that I don't have to earn His love, that I'm already His beloved daughter, chosen and adopted and cherished. And that truth changed everything. The group was silent for a moment, and then one by one, people began to respond, sharing their own stories of struggle with family rejection, with performance-based faith, with the fear of not being good enough. We prayed together, cried together, held space for each other's pain. As I looked around that circle, I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was the body of Christ. This was the family God had given me, and it was enough. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in it, I want you to know something. You are not alone. Whatever rejection you faced, whatever wounds you carry from family or church or people who should have loved you better, God sees you. He knows your pain. And He's inviting you to come home to Him, not as a performance or a project, but as a beloved child. You don't have to earn His love. You already have it, fully, completely, unconditionally. The journey to forgiveness isn't easy. It's costly. It requires letting go of the desire for revenge, for vindication, for people to finally see how much they hurt you. It means releasing them into God's hands and trusting Him to be the judge, while you choose to be the one who loves. But I can tell you from experience, it's worth it. The freedom on the other side of forgiveness is real. The peace that comes from resting in your identity as God's beloved child is sweeter than any human approval could ever be. So I want to ask you, where in your life are you longing for human approval instead of resting in God's love? Who might you need to forgive, even if it costs you comfort or relationship? How can you embrace your identity as God's beloved child today? Take a moment right now, wherever you are, and just breathe. Ask God to speak to your heart. Ask Him to show you one step you can take toward freedom. Maybe it's praying for someone who hurt you. Maybe it's setting a boundary you've been afraid to set. Maybe it's simply believing for the first time that you are loved just as you are. Let me pray for you. Lord, thank you for the person listening to this right now. You know their story. You know their pain. You know every wound, every rejection, every moment they've felt invisible or unworthy. I ask that you would meet them right where they are. Help them release bitterness and receive your grace. Teach them to love as you love and to find their worth in you alone. Remind them that they are your beloved child, chosen and cherished, not because of what they do, but because of who you are. Give them courage to take the next step. In Jesus' name, Amen. This week, I encourage you to do something practical. Take one moment each day to read and meditate on Ephesians chapter 1, verse 5, or Psalm 27. Write it down. Put it somewhere, you'll see it. Let God's truth about who you are sink deep into your soul. You are beloved, you are chosen, you are enough, and that changes everything.